Podcast. I'm your host, Rico Muhammad. We'll be joined shortly by my co-host, Mr. Chuck Snow, and this evening, our resident legal expert, Mr. Hank Seaton. He will be joining us this evening. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask, now's a great opportunity to get on board to speak with a real legal professional. All you have to do is jump into the chat, whichever platform that you're watching us on. I think the chat feature is all connected across all platforms. So just drop your question down in the chat, with the exception of Instagram. I'm sorry, on Instagram, I don't think that we have the chat feature doesn't kind of port over to our system over here on this end. But if you're on Facebook, if you're on YouTube, the chat feature should work just fine. So just type into the chat if you have a question, any legal question. Like I said, our resident legal expert, Hank Seaton, the author of the book, Rules of the Road. If you don't have this book, we'll tell you how to get a hold of it, how to get it into your library. A wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge inside of the book. But we'll get to that here shortly. Without any further ado, though, let's jump into this week's DAT Trendlines report. And we're showing that the price of diesel fuel has still kind of creeping on up there by zero point 0.3 percentage points again this week. The national average price of diesel fuel shows at $5.72 per gallon nationwide. Produce volumes not moving the needle much this season. This peak shipping week for produce season, this is the peak shipping week for produce this season, but we're still 16% behind this time of 2019, the last non-pandemic produce season. Even though reefer load posts on DAT's network increased by 18% last week, they're still 38% lower than last year and almost identical to the exact same time of 2018. In contrast, carriers posting their reefer equipment is at the highest level in 6 years, creating an oversupplied reefer market. In a non-pandemic year, reefer line haul rates typically increase by 12 cents per mile. In the first 3 weeks of June this year, they've dropped by that same amount month to date. Reefer spot rates include fuel, ended last week at just over $3 per mile, where they've been for the last where they've been for the last few weeks. Let's see here. I'm gonna see if I can get in here and if it will allow me. I know it should. Um, let's see. We're gonna look at all the different segment types. See if I can be able to share my screen here, and we're going to jump over and pull up the report for dry vans. We're showing that the average rate for dry vans up in the upper northeastern corridor sits at a $2.44 average on the outbound side of the market. Moving down to the mid-Atlantic and southeastern markets, we're showing an average outbound rate of $2.80. Jumping back up into the Midwest, we're showing an average outbound rate of $2.78 for dry vans. Moving down to the South Central region, showing $2.74, and checking out the West Coast, we're showing an average outbound rate of $2.63. Shifting gears, jumping over to flatbed portion of the report. Moving out of the northeastern upper corridor, we're showing an average outbound rate for flatbeds at $3.36. Moving down to the southeastern and mid-Atlantic states, we're showing an average outbound rate of $3.77. Moving up into the mid-Atlantic, we're showing that average outbound, the Midwest, we're showing an average outbound rate of $3.64. Moving out of the South Central region, we're showing an average outbound rate at $3.46. Wrapping up the West Coast, showing an average outbound rate at $2.97. Moving down to the reefer portion of the report, coming out of the upper northeastern corridor, showing an average outbound rate at $2.62. Moving out of the mid-Atlantic and southeastern states, we're showing an average outbound rate of $3.08. Coming out of the Midwest, we're showing an average outbound rate of $3.14. Moving out of the Rio Grande South Central region, we're showing an average outbound rate of $3.16. And out of the West Coast, we're showing that average outbound rate checks in at $3.10 per mile. And so with that being said, we'll stop sharing. We'll come back and we'll add in my co-host for the evening, Mr. Chuck Snow. Good evening, Chuck. How are you?
Well, we're doing well. Rico, how are you?
I cannot complain. It's a great day here in the down here in the Southeast. Kind of had getting ready for the 4th of July weekend, big weekend. I think that looking forward to a little bit of R&R, rest and relaxation and barbecue. But other than that, everything's well on this side of the equation.
Well, glad to hear. Listen, I want a big shout out to our friend and legal genius, Hank Seaton, because I kind of wasn't supposed to be here tonight, and Hank was generous enough to volunteer his time to co-host this show with you. And he's got a great topic he wants to talk about tonight, which I think is really important to everyone. And that is about these dispatch services that seem to be popping up, which I'm going to let Hank go into more of it, but they're really, I guess they're unlicensed load brokers. And with no further ado, Hank Seaton, how are you tonight? Great to see you.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. Before we get into the topic, which really should be dispatch services, a couple of quick updates. First of all, the Supreme Court decided not to take the appeal of C.H. Robinson in the Mueller case, which means that state law can trump federal law on negligent selection. That means there probably won't be any real change in nuclear verdict or insurance rates result of any Supreme Court action, which is probably predictable, but it's not a very happy result. The second issue really involves the Department of Labor, which has been having listening sessions, basically to determine if AB 5 should come to Washington and they should change the criteria for independent contractors in trucking. I participated. There were several other trucking organizations that did. This was the quote employers hearing session, and DOL didn't have any friends among the listeners. I think everybody was singing the same story, which is, hey, you're going to rob businessmen of opportunity, and we don't want to be 9 to 5. We want to be able to choose our own routes and make our own way as businessmen. That's an issue that obviously, depending upon the fall elections, is going to be around. And those are issues that are systemic issues we'll be covering. Now for dispatch services, I'll just introduce it a little bit and throw it open for questions. Somebody got to Congress and asked that they require DOT to open a potential rulemaking to determine whether a dispatch service was a broker and whether or not they needed to have a bond. The agency's questions that they ask are all due for answers on the 11th of the month. I'll review some of those questions and how and why I think we should care. First of all, the agency is asking some really pretty dumb questions like, what is a dispatch service? Well, a dispatch service is not like a broker or a carrier. There is no statutory or reasonable definition for it. It's a 21st century outgrowth of the spot market and all of the new carriers that are coming into it. You can understand that there's a felt need for somebody who's used to running one truck and trying to play the spot market to have somebody to find loads for him.
Hey.
Obviously, he's going to need some help in that regard.
Hank.
Yeah.
Before we jump into the dispatch service piece, I just got a question. I want to circle back around real quickly.
Sure.
When it goes back, we were talking. You had mentioned about the Supreme Court and C.H. Robinson case and about negligent selection. Does that kind of fall in the same vein as vicarious liability? Kind of does that all kind of like does that kind of go hand in hand with vicarious liability?
It does. The argument that we have consistently tried to make is that a shipper or a broker obligation is to choose a carrier who's licensed, authorized, and insured, and it's the agency's job to police who is fit to operate. That's the only logical solution you can make out of the fact that the agency even exists, is they determine who's safe to use.
Right.
Well, plaintiff's bar has made the argument that no, every shipper and broker has to credential the carrier with standards that nobody has set. So that becomes a question of state law and really monkeys things up, so that plaintiff's bar, if there is an accident, will start probing into the background of the driver and the company and use SMS scores and whatever else they can to make the motor carrier look like a devil on wheels. And that's what then feeds into these nuclear verdicts. And that's what drags people like C.H. Robinson into the lawsuit. So it's the fear then of plaintiffs' bar getting nuclear judgments that runs up insurance costs.
So what I
Particularly-
like, what
Go
I
ahead.
like to try to do, Hank, is I don't know, and I didn't talk to you about this previously, but I don't know if we may be able to tie all of this stuff in together with this whole. Since we're talking about vicarious liability, we're kind of talking about dispatch services. So you have of course you have a carrier, you have a broker. Of course, those are two separate entities. But then we have this third entity that we're talking about with this dispatch service that is also getting kind of inserting themselves into the supply chain. And you have, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or not, but the explosion of this whole dispatch service and even trucking, even carriers to a certain degree, with the age of all of the stuff that has been going on in social media, there's tons of people that are out here, the gurus and stuff like that are promoting dispatch, teaching you dispatch services, teaching how to be a carrier, so on and so forth. So you have a bunch of uncredentialed, I call them uncredentialed fake gurus that are out here that are kind of giving basic information, but not real nuts and bolt information about starting trucking, about starting a trucking company, starting a dispatch service, and they're telling all this stuff, and they're selling you these courses for a couple of thousands of dollars. Of course, they're making money telling you very practical, rudimentary stuff on a basic level, and you're getting in business, of course. But then getting out here, and I think a lot of people are starting to find out that trucking is not as clear cut as they made it to seem. And you had a lot of people last year that kind of jumped into the business, and you got a lot of people that are exiting the business just as quickly this year. So if someone that is listening in that may have found themselves in some of these situations, just kind of, I don't know, can't save them now, but as far as the aspect of keeping them from paying a dispatcher or paying a quote unquote guru, but trying to give some information and education as to save themselves a little bit of frustration from getting caught up and entangled into the web of the whole vicarious liability situation. If we can maybe break that down a little bit when it comes to the broker, dispatch, and carrier, if we can tie all that together. If you follow what I'm going with that.
Yeah, I do. First of all, these alleged gurus of transportation who have now got all of these products to sell and sell it based upon the notion that you can enter the trucking industry and not be subject to regulation or best practices, and that it's just really the Wild West is unfortunate. Anyone who is migrating to a power only status or to being a one truck operator and thinks the road's going to be easy is sadly mistaken, particularly when the insurance costs that he's paying compared to what he's currently got with the owner operator model is probably an additional $15,000 to $20,000 in cost. And as you've often said, if you can get started small and have dependable return freight and work in a niche, then you don't you're not subject to being abused in the marketplace. And we can talk about some of the abuses in the marketplace with fraud and non-payment and price gouging and all kinds of things. It's a hard way to go. I don't want to throw cold water on the 100,000 new people that are entering the marketplace. A lot of them from California because they just very simply can't continue as owner operators out there. But you've got to go into it with your eyes wide open. The problem with the dispatch services, and I'm not sure we can do this in an hour, is that they think they have found a way to be deregulated. Not the bonds chump change, for somebody who's going to be an intermediary to have a $75,000 bond pales against the fact it might cost them $2,000 a year. That pales against the cost of having one truck and paying the taxes and insurance on that. So the bond's not really an issue. What is the issue is that brokers are subject to regulation just like carriers are, and brokers have to keep records. It's not whether or not they all just handle the money, but they are responsible for a whole bunch of compliance, particularly centered around double brokerage and those kinds of things. And there are federal laws that give you access to these fraudsters. Now, we got to do something about the fact that the FMCSA uh, doesn't want to do anything other than take down the information about the frauds. Rather than trying to create a new group of exempt entities, they really need to help us deal with some of the chronic abuses in the internet market. But these dispatch services pose a whole lot of risk. Uh, the definition of a broker says that you are a broker if you arrange for compensation and if you have the right to select between carrier A and carrier B. That's because that a legitimate sales agent working as part of an ordinary course of business for a single carrier is not a broker. He's not a broker not only because he doesn't handle the money, he's also not a broker because he can't select to give it to carrier A or carrier B, and he's subject to having to keep records, and he's subject to prosecution if he turns out to be double brokering or scamming around the regulations. So our argument about the uh, uh, the dispatch services is, look, the rules contemplate that you can be a sales agent and you don't have to necessarily handle the money. You can work for 4 or 5 different companies if you want to. You just got to comply with the other broker regulations. And you've got to not participate in scams. You've got to not rebate money. There are all kinds of little important things in the broker regulations that any legitimate dispatch service can very easily accommodate. But
Okay, so if you don't mind, Hank, let's unpack that let's kind of stay there for a second. Let's unpack that. Let's unpack that portion right there where you were just saying you can be an independent, basically an independent sales agent.
yeah, I mean, I'll just give you some of the questions that I'm answering as part of this survey. They said, well, explain how sales agents are ordinary parts of companies now. And the simple answer to that is lots of carriers will want to expand their operation, and they'll go buy another small carrier in Kansas City, and the owner of that company then will be a sales agent for the acquiring company for a number of years, so that the acquiring company keeps the rapport and is able to open a company shop in Kansas City. People like the Landstar model are perfect examples of that. There are all kinds of examples of people who have developed a clientele in a particular area and want to go to work as an independent businessman on a part-time basis for a carrier. But if they're part of the ordinary business of a single carrier and have the power of the pen so that the carrier recognizes them as an agent, it's kind of like me being an in-house lawyer for Amazon. I work for Amazon. Amazon knows that I don't have my own shop. So there are plenty of examples of where that rule has worked for years and where there is a clear distinction between what is a bona fide agent and what is a broker. But where they get all screwed up is they say, well, under the broker regulation, the uh, the call boards are brokers. Why? Because they arrange for transportation for compensation. To which my answer is, yeah, they are. And as call boards keeping records with respect to the movements of shipments and the carriers they serve, they need a bond.
But they're not handling the money, Hank. The call boards don't handle it, like DAT and Internet Truck Stop. They don't handle any of the money. They're just saying.
But see, there is your issue. There is the issue that this is all about. It's not whether they handle the money that makes them a broker. It is not just whether or not they handle the money. Handling the money is only one provision. And that provision of the regulation says that anyone who is involved in arranging and could select between parties has to keep records on a load by load basis showing who was hired and who was paid. Now, if you are maintaining the constructive trust that you ought to, that I as a lawyer do, and that's your deal with your customer, then those that accounting has to show when you got the money from the shipper and when you paid the carrier.
Right.
But and I know that 80% of the brokers now say that's waived. They say you're looking only to the broker for payment. Right. Okay? They're not even maintaining a constructive trust. So you walked right in to the trap. It is not whether or not you're handling the money.
Hank, what happens in the case? I know that that Traffics, for example, if Seaton Trucking does a load for Traffics today, and the broker says to you, Hank, I'll tell you what, I'm really desperate. I got to get I really need this truck. I'll pay you tomorrow. We'll wire you the money tomorrow. And we do, but we don't get paid for 60 or 90 days. How does the trust work? Because we're paying well ahead. And normally Traffics, like a lot of other brokers, pay the carriers much quicker than the broker gets paid. So where does the trust work in there? How does that work with the trust?
Well, my advice as a carrier rep is to ensure that you do not give up in a contract the obligation of the broker to receive the payment from the shipper in trust and to pay you unless he's gone into his own reserves and paid you on a timely basis. But this idea of robbing Peter to pay Paul, I think is a violation of the purpose of the broker regulations, but it happens all the time.
Oh, I agree. They use
that's a different issue. Here's my issue. Let's say, for instance, that some guy calls you up and he says, I'm not a broker. I don't have a broker's license, but I got a stable of 10 little carriers, and I represent each one of them as a dispatch service. So, I want to get Seaton Trucking qualified with you. Okay. So all of a sudden you put me through, I'm qualified. You know that I've got a good safety rating and all that stuff. And then he calls up and he says, oh, look, I got a load for Seaton Trucking. It needs to move out of California. and you book it, only to find out that Seaton Trucking don't pick up the load.
Right.
Somebody else does, and he hits a school bus. Okay.
Yeah.
At that point, he had the ability to bait and switch on you. And all of a sudden, you and your customer get sued because somehow you negatively selected some wahoo named Rico. And what I'm saying is, when you get a middleman inserted who can do bait and switch, then
Right.
you get somebody in the middle who says he's a dispatch service, but lo and behold, you have 5 loads of copper steels stolen. And all you know is the guy you were talking to at the end of the phone has disappeared, and the government doesn't know who he was or where he went. And if you had any remedy against a broker who did that in terms of federal self-help, that's gone, because this dispatch service isn't on anybody's radar. He doesn't have any federal obligations, and state obligations are trumped by the F4A Act. So I'm just saying, you are setting up uh, not for the legitimate people
Right.
who want to provide a service, but you're just expanding the scope of fraudsters who can be unaccountable. And, you know, half the loads that move, you don't even have the carrier's name on it. So you see somebody says, "Oh, I'm a dispatch service, and I work for Seaton Trucking, and they're a good company." So you sign them on, and now all of a sudden you got to check every load. And if he is a scamster, you can't even check who owns the company, how long he's been in business,
No, there's no. You're
what
right,
his
because there's no
references
barrier.
are.
There's no barrier to entry. I know that talking to other freight brokers, and it happens. We think so. We deal with if we deal with a dispatch service, and we think we're going to give the load to Seaton Trucking, who we know is a 5-star carrier, and some of these people they may have Seaton Trucking in their roster, but they give the load to some other guy who we've never heard of, who in turn gives it to another guy who we've never heard of. And all of a sudden, everything gets messed up because the guy that actually does the work, which sometimes can be brokered 3 times, everybody's seen that one, and nobody gets paid.
Yeah, well, Chuck, poignantly, because you haul produce,
Yeah.
that in produce you can have people tendering you loads that they've got no way to check whatsoever, and they've got no accountability. And
Yes.
that is really the issue. As a lawyer, I gotta abide by certain rules of the rules
Yeah.
of the profession, regardless of whether I'm handling collections for you.
Right.
I could do all kinds of other things in terms of misrepresenting you in a fraudulent way, that should be subject to discipline. Well, when you're talking about interstate commerce, until we get a division over DOT that cares, all we've got is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, who is responsible for administering things like MAP 21,
Right.
seeing that frauds are dealt with. Well, how are they going to do that if some guy can just say, "Oh, I'm a dispatch service, I'm not subject to any of that"?
And they're gone. Yeah, that as soon as something happens, they have no skin in the game. Nobody knows who they are, and here today, gone tomorrow, and leaving the trucker and possibly the broker all holding the bag, and leaving a bunch of destruction behind them.
Well, I mean, if I were a big shipper and I were going to outsource my freight to traffics, I understand co-brokerage, but I'm not so doggone sure I would want you using a dispatch service.
No, I agree.
If ultimately some unlicensed carrier could hit a school bus, and now after Miller, I could
Exactly.
be sued.
So
So
Bruce,
one of the
Bruce,
silly questions that the agency asked was, well, why can't we just back off of this and you have state law? Listen, under state law, there isn't any way to tell of the hundreds of thousands of corporations incorporated in California which ones are even dealing with trucking,
Yeah.
much less have a bond or anything like that. So that's just kind of like saying, eat them, let them eat cake. There is no way that you can catch a crook unless the federal government is there in some way to help you.
I agree.
so we have a comment from Bruce. Bruce says that the people I get calls from soliciting for dispatch services are persons whom I believe come from other countries where regulations are lax or non-existent. I had one call me this week, and when I asked the question, who sent out the invoices, he said that they would send it out. And when I asked them who collected the money, they said that they did. I informed them that I didn't work for illegitimate brokers.
Well, amen there. Look, I do not. If there are listeners on the phone who are immigrants, the last thing I want to do is appear to be not embracing of the fact that they've got every right, if they're here legally, to participate in the American dream. But it is an increasing problem that dispatchers are dispatching freight from foreign countries.
Right.
And,
We
and,
got
and I know that there are very legitimate and large carriers who are outsourcing their customer service to Latin America, where they don't have to pay overtime and they get good service. But can you imagine what happens to this country if you have got uh, dispatch services that work kind of like AT&T does? You want to talk to customer service, and you can tell by the accent they're in Burma. I mean, how in the world? It's not Burma now; it's Myanmar. But how in the world do you chase a dispatch service? The Philippines. I'm
right,
just saying that,
Right.
ultimately, when you're talking about enforcing the law, you've got to have some rudimentary laws that don't impose a burden on transportation, but at least give us a level and honest playing field.
right. And then the other thing I think that comes along with that as well is you've got another step in which on trying to you're extending credit to the broker, of course, via the dispatch service, but then the dispatch service is collecting the checks, and then you have to wait on a whole nother process in order for them to get paid, and then cut you. Like, if
Yeah, but
that's the
see
case,
what they're saying, Rico, is they want the agency to promulgate new regulations that say that you're only a broker if you collect the money.
Right.
They want to say that that a guy is not subject to regulation if he arranges for transportation, even for multiple parties, as long as he doesn't collect the money. Now, we know that collecting the money is important, and I'm the last one to say that a carrier should give up the idea that a legitimate broker shouldn't rob Peter to pay Paul. But that is the broker regulations are worth a whole lot more than that. There is in the broker regulations a definition that says that the broker cannot be affiliated with a carrier or another entity. In other words, without disclosing it. The whole idea of rebating and behind the pocket kickbacks and all of those kinds of things are written into the broker regulations to keep traffic managers from hiring their brother-in-law as a broker.
okay.
Okay. And the illegal kickbacks and those kinds of things. If you go through the items, and we will in the pleading, and say, look, get over it, guys. Whoever is telling you that it's just about handling the money doesn't know about cargo theft.
Right.
They don't know about vicarious liability. They don't know about there's one provision in the law that says that it's called the Truth in Billing Regulations. All of those kinds of things are set up to impose on the brokers the same obligations that the carriers do to be transparent and accountable. And, there won't be any transparency and accountability if you just call yourself a dispatch service.
All right. So we got a couple of other questions here. Tamika has sent me a couple of questions that she has for us. First question: why did the bond change from 10,000 to 75,000?
The bond changed because that was Ida's scalp. What they wanted was they were trying to deal with broker abuse, and they thought that if they could get the bond raised, that would help. And so they had the moxie to get it through. When it first went through, everybody thought, well, gee, the way the insurance industry works, that'll just stifle small brokers because they can never get a bond. That really wasn't the case. The bond has even gotten cheaper. If you part of the problem is now. Usually, the guy who starts a small brokerage is going to have a pretty good financial record. He's going to have to guarantee he's going to pay the surety back if it's exercised. So it's it's not that he doesn't have any skin in the game, but what has happened, guys, is that $75,000 bond doesn't really touch the issue.
Right.
Not at all.
There's one that I'm going to include for the agency. They say, what else do you think we should do? And my solution to that is get more serious about enforcing the regulations rather than remove them. And the
Congratulations.
example is a guy called Priority. Okay. Priority and its sister company, a motor carrier set up in California, and in 6 months, double brokered a bunch of loads. When they were foreclosed on the bond, there were well over 200 claimants, I think, but the tear amount was $1.9 million in claims. Okay, so all of the claimants got something like maybe $4 a hundred.
Yeah.
The amount of the return was just negligible. And so far, nobody has pursued these guys. These guys, it's an individual. And, you can go on the internet and you can very easily trace Priority and see what the people have found out in the chat rooms about the pedigree of the owner. And he's from an area of California where this has been systemic ever since I've been practicing law, and still untouched. And I cannot tell you guys how many major companies get defrauded, and they just throw up their hands and say, "Well, we can't catch them. Let's don't try." And indeed, you probably can't unless you get the government with the subpoena power to make the banks turn over, follow the money. Because as an individual, I can't very well go marching into Wells Fargo and say, I think this guy's a crook. I want to see where the money went.
And you have to have somebody that's got the grit to chase these guys down, because it's a big job. We had a guest on our show once who was a paralegal that chased down. She actually she had worked for us at one point, and then she went to work for a factoring company up here in Canada, and she made it her business. She was 724 on these guys, and she used to get them into court. She knew how the small claims court system worked up here, and she actually took some of these, the real scoundrels, to the Ontario Supreme Court. And she had to get an actual lawyer to represent the factoring company for those. But it does, after several conversations with Cheryl, it's nothing more than having the time and the grit to go after them. And unfortunately, quite often, our government and the people that work there have neither. They don't have the time or the grit to follow these through.
Here's a large part of the problem. When you've got a theft or you've got a problem like that and it's interstate in nature, the local police don't want that theft going on their record.
Right.
If the stuff is stolen out of El Paso, and the El Paso police say, well, it's beyond our jurisdiction. The last we heard of it was in Chicago. Well, Chicago sure doesn't want to take it up, and the FBI is worried about organized crime and people that get killed and overdoses and things
and everything else. Yeah.
So there's nobody protecting interstate commerce.
Yeah, they've let it run, and that's why we have this mess. At one point, I'm sure when I got into this business, and I'm sure when you started practicing law, the old ICC, they actually had some teeth, which they've been disbanded, and now we have a couple other agencies, of which they're all toothless. The odd time you'll hear, if you're listening to Transport Topics radio or something, you'll hear that some company got their authority taken away because their safety record was so bad, or somebody has been forbidden to ever operate a commercial vehicle in America again, or whatever. But there are far and few cases that you hear about that are really prosecuted to the full extent what they should be doing.
Here's the real issue in the U.S., and I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but DOT has modal agencies. So, like, there's a Federal Maritime Commission, there's the FAA, and there was the ICC. The ICC took seriously its job to administer rules of commerce as well as safety rules. FMC has the job of dealing with all of the steamship lines and the ports, and they have procedures in terms of looking at unreasonable practices and actually doing some policing. The FMCSA, when it was set up, will quickly tell you that its name is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and not only its North Star, but its sole job is highway safety.
Right.
And I understand their passion, but that leaves you with the Department of Transportation somehow responsible for implementing the National Transportation Policy, which has a whole lot of really very special language in it about having a free marketplace where little guys can have an opportunity, and where there are rules of commerce that treat shippers, carriers, and the public fairly. So the National Transportation Policy goes a whole lot further than the FMCSA is currently configured to do.
I'm not sure if this is a question that we probably, Tamika sent a couple of other questions. May have been a question better suited for last week when we had Tommy Rook on, but I'm gonna throw it at you anyway, Hank. The insurance, she says that the insurance is tripling with the interest of the industry, and the rules are changing. Can you speak to why you think the rate of insurance is going? What may be behind the catalyst of making the insurance rate go as high as they are?
I think there are a couple of reasons. I think number one is lack of competition in the insurance industry. I think number two, that this problem of vicarious liability and deep pockets and the ability of plaintiffs' bar to, particularly on auto liability insurance, get large settlements is part of the reason. Part of your thinking is if you have written $1 million policy for a small carrier, then a lot of the insurance companies feel compelled, rather than pay my brethren who are defense lawyers $500,000 to try one of these things, to very quickly say, oh, well, we'll offer policy limits and get done. And so for that reason, if one of two things happens, if the accident is bad enough so that the plaintiff's bar can convince the jury that this poor quadriplegic needs to be paid, regardless of whether or not the carrier was that negligent, that's going to be $1 million gone. On the other hand, if the driver is shown to be his ELD shows he was doing 85 miles an hour, even though there's a short, soft tissue with very little damage, the insurance company's going to say, man, that jury can just go wild with punitive damages. So what I'm saying is they're looking after their pocketbook, and their tendency is, particularly for small carriers, to pay the policy limits. So, that makes their loss runs look bad, and their cost of litigating looks bad, and they're in it to make money. So they look at what their projected expenditures are going to be. And so that's why it kind of halfway tracks back to this, where are the deep pockets and what's it worth? There are a lot of insurance companies that are a lot of ambulance chasers that advertise on everybody's TV. We get you not what you need, but we get you what you want, and that makes a mockery out of litigation. But the rates go up because the insurance companies claim they aren't making any money.
Right. And they're not. And that's why so many insurance companies have bailed out of insuring heavy trucks long distance. They don't want that market.
Well, no, they don't. And see, the other thing about it that is discriminatory in a way against small carriers is most of my sophisticated clients that have maybe as many as 100 trucks are part of a captive. And, they can put together a captive, which basically goes in and they put some skin in the game, and they manage their own claims. So their claims cost for their fender benders is really, really very negligible. They're not paying, an insurance company for the chump change claims. And, they're the ones that can get their rates in hand. I can tell you this, that it's a question of really, really having to shop it and have, if you've got a satisfactory safety rating, even though it shouldn't make any difference, it does. If you've got a satisfactory safety rating and you've been in business for a while, you can probably get your insurance for a third of the cost of somebody new getting into the industry.
Oh, definitely, most definitely.
That's just a entry barrier. You can be a 20-year driver for Schneider and never had a reportable accident, but nobody in the insurance industry is going to take enough time to recognize that and give you the break, because it's hard to get an agent even interested in writing a premium on a one truck Charlie, because they're getting a percentage, the same percentage referral on 100 trucks. So
right. Hey, can I ask you something? Is it
the little guys?
You know what? Is it they don't give that one truck Charlie that's got a phenomenal driving record, a 20-year clean driving record, and they're not giving him or her a break because they don't have to? Do you think that's it sometimes?
Well, I do, but I mean, when in the U.S., I think it's well over 60% of the new carriers are underwritten by flow. You really don't have a whole lot of competition.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's unfortunate. The trucking industry sure runs on price competition and quality competition, but particularly in the segment of the market that most of us play in, they don't. 97% of the authorized motor carriers have 10 or fewer trucks.
Right. And that's another thing I wanted to get into a little bit. I'm looking at the time and we're getting close. Um, I'm looking on. I try to keep abreast different things that are going on in the trucking industry, social media wise, YouTube, things of that nature. And I'm seeing a lot of people post on their different YouTube channels that they're getting out of the business because and one guy was giving an analogy about why he decided to shut his company down. And he was saying that the biggest issue for him was that insurance, of course, was a major thing. He was coming up on a renewal, and that was ultimately the straw that broke the camel's back. Was his renewal came back significantly higher than what he was anticipating for this renewal cycle. But the second thing that he was mentioning, and I thought it was kind of wild, but this is the thing that we talk about all the time here on this podcast, is he was saying the inability to be able to control price of services. He was his biggest problem was that he could not control what he could charge, and what he was saying by that was, of course, I'm taking it. He was growing his company. He was way out there. He was only in business for 3 years. I tip my hat to him. He had grew his company to 17 trucks, and within a 3-year time span. And one of the things that they talk about, especially at the NASDAQ convention, is growing too slow and growing too fast. And I think that he might have fell into the latter of those categories of trying to grow too fast. When you try to grow I think that when you try to attempt to grow your company like that, and the bulk of your business is from load boards and brokers, and you don't have the relationships established, then you put yourself in a precarious situation where you don't have control over the cost and the pricing.
I think I mentioned to you in that regard that I'm writing an article for a magazine on the challenges and opportunities, and about the only opportunity I could find was in mergers and acquisitions. Because guys that have got money think that now may be the time to be vertically integrated so that you're multimodal if you're big enough, or expand your service territory, and they do what they call tuck-ins. But for the little guys, I think most of them, the folks that are 40 or 50 and been in it for a few years, are saying it isn't going to be last century's trucking anymore. All of a sudden, with the new cost of equipment, if I want to buy it, it may be obsolete in 5 years. And I used to be able to buy 2 trucks for what I'm going to buy one for. And then they say, and with the interest rates going up, how am I going to continue to give 60 days to pay? And then they're saying, well, gee, this has been a family business for 3 generations, but my son doesn't want anything to do with it. And I can't very well recommend somebody get into trucking. Truck driving is the future. So then they turn around and they say, well, look, these trucks are worth a premium right now. I can get a little extra money out of the trucks. Maybe it's time to retire because the future is a great unknown.
Right.
So you put all that together, and I don't know many of my old time friends who've been around for 20 years. They're not out desperate, but boy, they certainly entertain the idea of the right price. And I was at a trucker lawyer convention, and one of the guys at the end of the table was talking about mergers and acquisitions, and he said his firm was just doing that. That there were just hundreds.
It makes a lot of sense. Number one, we're in a market where it's very hard to get drivers, and we're in a market where it's very hard to get equipment. So if you've got a customer base that needs more capacity, you can't buy the trucks, you can't buy the trailers, you can't find the drivers. Buy somebody out and take their equipment and drivers and put them under your banner, merge some of your overheads, tuck those in, and instead of having running 2 yards, you run one.
Yeah, and the old idea was that the company was worth EBITDA, which is some kind of mathematical formula, sometimes your earnings. And that was
Right.
the way you priced it. And then when the driver shortage came around, there are people saying, well, gee, I'll give you $10,000 for every butt in the seat. And now you turn around and say, hey, look, I got a trailer. I got a trailer shortage and I got an equipment shortage. That truck that you've got down may have equity in it. So now you've got those three sources of added value that maybe this is a propitious time to sell, even though we know inflation's going crazy.
Well, it is for the right people. You know what? It's a great time for some people to sell, and it's a great time for other people to buy. If you have a business and your children aren't interested, and you're working 7 days a week and you're 65 years old or 70 years old, probably a good time to get out. And if you're building a company and you can't get that equipment, probably a good time to take that guy out. So, it's a marriage.
Yeah. So really the tough thing that I think is for me, I'm low tech, but what little bit I know about electronic stuff, and I'm being told by my folks, is that that the damn tractor is going to weigh an additional 15,000 pounds, and what's that going to do? The 80-pound rule. I mean, I think there are some issues out here, like where are you going to charge that Jesse, and then for the driverless trucks. Boy, I hate to see the vicarious liability there. I'm just, I'm too risk averse to join the Gee Whiz kids in that. I don't have enough lifespan left to see it, so it's not really an issue. But my son's in trucking, and he may be able to ride it out for his career. But gee, I don't know. It's a brave new world, guys.
Right. So look, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Hank for taking the time out of his schedule to join us. He kind of does this on a monthly basis, comes on and talks shop with us. If you do not have this book, this is Hank Seaton's latest book, Rules of the Road. You can go and you can get this book over at his website, www.transportationlaw.net. This book is a wealth of information. If you're in the trucking industry and you don't have this on your shelf, I suggest you buy 2 copies. Have one with you in your office and keep one in your book in your briefcase or whatever on you at all times. Just slight little thing here. We was talking. There's an appendix here in the back. He goes over in detail about the bill of lading. He goes over. He has sample contracts, and I even think you can get a copy of the sample contracts on the website over at www.transportationlaw.net. As far as if you in talks with a shipper, there's a shipper carrier contract sample that's in there. There's a shipper broker contract that is in there. So just different things. He goes over all of this stuff. He breaks it down into very simple layman's terms. You don't have this. I can't stress it enough. I don't know why you wouldn't have this. This is the Bible of the trucking industry, in my humble estimation, in my humble opinion. So once again, we thank Hank for taking time out of his schedule to come on and join us. If you want the book, you can go and grab the book, www.transportationlaw.net. Hank, is there anything else you want to say before we get out of here? Anything you want to add to?
No, not really. Next time I'm invited back, I want to talk about the importance of carriers coming up with livable service terms and conditions and using it as a starting point for negotiating. If some guy wants you to have excess liability for cargo loss or damage, it's a risk you need to be able to price. Those kinds of things I'm seeing are really cracks for small people, because the contracts you're asked to sign in the spot market are sometimes very, very lethal. But we'll save that for another day.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Hank, for taking time out of your schedule to come on and join us. We greatly appreciate it. Chuck Snow,
Yes, if anybody gets hold of me, wants to get hold of me, best way to do it, send me an email, chuck@traffix, TRAFFIX.com. Whatever you need, if you want to get set up with one of our offices, or you're having some challenges in this market, or you need some advice, please reach out to me. Make sure you put a phone number in, and I promise to get back to everybody. And with that, Rico, I'll let you back her in a hole for another week.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us again this evening. This has been the Rates and Lanes podcast. We do this show. It's not a big production. We're trying to integrate and do some other things on the show, but you can find us over on YouTube now. Rates and everything is Rates and Lanes. Of course, we're on Instagram. Of course, we're on Facebook. And this show is basically something for the small guy, the little guy that don't have access. We pride ourselves on trying to bring on knowledgeable experts that can answer your questions and kind of give you a little bit of a leg up in this industry. And so there's no such thing when we bring these guys and ladies and gentlemen on that come and spend time with us. There's no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. We all didn't know at some point in time. So always feel free. So if there's a question if there's anything that we can do to help make us better, if there's a question that you have for us, give us some homework assignments. Let us know what it is that we can do, that we can bring here on the show to kind of help, give more information and get more information out there in the industry, because we do this show strictly for you guys, the small 1 to 5 truck carriers that are out there. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to talking with you same time, same place next week. Stay safe out there. Stay healthy. Keep it in between the mustard and the mayonnaise, and God willing, we'll talk with you same time, same place next week. God bless you and good night.
Good night.
Catch on the flip flop. God bless.
God bless.